Hempstead Branch wrote, his screaming stallions maimed with whistling wind. Hello once again, I'm Don Jackson with The Wind in My Hair. Louise Imogene Guiney wrote, I hear in my heart, I hear in its ominous pulses, all day on the road, the hooves of invisible horses, all night from their stalls, the importunate pawing and neighing. Horses figure in lovers' superstitions, according to Roberta B. Etter in her book Tokens of Love. For example, if you see a white horse while out walking with your lover, it's said to foretell a good marriage. It makes me wonder about seeing a dark horse. E. Cummings wrote, all in green went my love riding on a great horse of gold into the silver dawn. There is the possibility that he may have been bewitched by something supernatural, disguised as his love riding that horse through the long night. Horseshoes were once nailed over doorways to ward off witches, but it's not always a witch you need to be worried about. In the Middle Ages, riders on the road late at night by the light of a full moon might have been led astray by a will-o'-the-wisp into a horse pond. Maybe it was something else that had led them astray. A lot of fanciful tales and superstitions have their origins in the deep, dark past. Some of them had to do with the little folk and their rides. From the Time Life series Night Creatures was this. In Scandinavia, for instance, Night was the goddess Not, riding the skies in a chariot until she disappeared beyond the horizon, forced down by the power of her son, Day. The froth from her horse's mouth fell to the earth as dew. End quote. From another source of mine was this. The fairies of England changed hempen stalks into horses. The trolls of Shetland, who were bigger, rode on bulrushes. But there were fairies in Wales about the size of a 2 or 3 year old child who had fairy horses no bigger than greyhounds. Yet fairies often stole real horses from their stalls at night, and knotting the locks of their manes into stirrups, mounted their necks and rode them until dawn. The Puka, a water fairy of Ireland, the Kelpie of Scotland, and the Neck of Iceland appeared almost always as horses. When mounted, they plunged straight away into the sea. So it was never safe to climb upon the back of a horse who wore its hooves backward. God regarded the south wind with pleasure, says Arabian legend, and decided to make of it a creature. Condense, he said to the wind, and the first horse sped over the earth. Bred by the Bedouin to race across the desert, and into war with a fleet grace contemptuousness of hardship. Arabian horses are thought to be the oldest recognized breed, with a history stretching back to the Queen of Sheba. On more certain ground, all thoroughbreds, the racing breed of man-o'-war and secretariat, trace their lineage back to 3 stallions, all or part Arabian, that were shipped to England in the 17th and 18th centuries. Arabians look as different from other horses as fairy tale princes and princesses look from peasants. They hold their tails high and arch their necks in swan-like curves. Their heads are finely chiseled, and widely spaced cheekbones sweep into a muzzle said to be delicate enough to drink from a teacup. The Arabian look signals aristocratic beauty, but the form has pragmatic roots. The cheekbones and arched throat make room for a large, loosely slung windpipe. The hold of the head and neck, often humanized as proud, tilts the whole apparatus at a prime angle for easy air exchange. They really are, as legend says, drinkers of the wind. These are excerpts from an article entitled "They Drink the Wind" by Jennifer Lee Carroll from Smithsonian Magazine. And again I quote, "Today, one of the world's largest individually owned horse farms, Al-Marah Arabians, still breeds these horses amid the rigors of the desert, but halfway around the globe from the sands of Arabia in Tucson, Arizona. Over 60 years, owner Ruth McCormick Tankersley, known to her friends as Basie, has bred at least 2,400 horses. God, she says, did not make the horse to stand still. Neither did the Bedouin, under whose harsh care and adoration the Arabian became what is a flesh-and-blood marathoning machine. For months, their horses might be fed on just camel's milk and crushed dates, enduring forced marches over burning, barren landscapes, only to be asked to summon the courage and energy to race into battle. Horses without deep reserves of stamina simply died. To the Bedouin, she explains, good disposition was imperative. Nomadic horses were a part of the family. During bad sandstorms, mares and foals were even brought into the tents." End quote. Some excerpts from "They Drink the Wind" by Jennifer Lee Carroll. Finally, the heedless night did plunge down amongst the thick trunks of the trees, and I was picking my way, counting on the instincts of my horse more than on my own failing vision. The pale half-moon seemed in love with the clouds. The sky was nothing but bits and pieces, thanks to the canopy of foliage above me. An excerpt from Chapter 4 of Vittorio, the Vampire, by Anne Rice. I'd like to remind you that after listening to this program, you might want to visit my YouTube channel and watch the video entitled "The Listeners." During the whole of a dull, dark, and soundless day in the autumn of the year, when the clouds hung oppressively low in the heavens, I had been passing alone on horseback through a singularly dreary tract of country, and at length found myself, as the shades of the evening drew on, within view of the melancholy house of Usher. If anyone could take us for a ride through the haunted countryside of our dreams, it was Edgar Allan Poe. Those classic lines reminded me of this legend that appeared in the 1977 edition of the Friendship Book of Francis Gay, and I quote, "King Alexander the Great was known for his knowledge and love of horses. On one occasion, seeing a friend having difficulty controlling a frightened horse, he told him, 'Turn its head to the sun.' The rider did so, and the horse immediately became quiet and calm. 'You see,' said Alexander, 'it was frightened by its own dancing shadow.' Often we too may be frightened by the shadow of our own fears. By turning towards the sun, we can put the shadows behind us." She had been on the front porch, and he had ridden up the long avenue, dressed in gray broadcloth, with a wide black cravat setting off his frilled shirt to perfection. Even now, she could recall each detail of his dress, how brightly his boots shone, the head of a Medusa in cameo on his cravat pin, the wide Panama hat that was instantly in his hand when he saw her. She had wanted him in that first instant, wanted him as simply and unreasoningly as she wanted food to eat, horses to ride, and a soft bed on which to lay herself. Scarlett O'Hara considering Ashley Wilkes from Chapter 2 of Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell. On my bike rides in past summers, I used to pass a farm where they raised championship racehorses. On any one of those days, you might encounter a few running by themselves across an open pasture, kicking up the fallen leaves as they thundered by. I could imagine what it must be like not to see them at first, but to hear their thundering hooves somewhere off in the dark night. There is something haunting and yet extraordinarily beautiful about seeing a horse and rider crossing a nighttime landscape, following, yet at the same time trying to outrun the moonlight. There was a television commercial on the air some time back that showed wild horses running free at night. They seemed to appear out of thin air by the light of the moon. They turned as one, and again seemed to retreat back into the darkness. A Tibetan writer in Love Poems of the 6th Dalai Lama wrote, "Wild horses running in the hills can be caught with snares or lassos, but not even magic charms can stop a lover's heart that has turned away." John Ray said, "If wishes were horses, beggars might ride." This is called Keep Your Dream. The writer begins, and I quote, "I have a friend named Monty Roberts who owns a horse ranch in San Ysidro. He has let me use his house to put on fundraising events to raise money for youth at-risk programs. The last time I was there, he introduced me by saying, 'I want to tell you why I let Jack use my house. It all goes back to a story about a young man who was the son of an itinerant horse trainer who would go from stable to stable, racetrack to racetrack, farm to farm, and ranch to ranch, training horses. As a result, the boy's high school career was continually interrupted. When he was a senior, he was asked to write a paper about what he wanted to be and do when he grew up. That night, he wrote a 7-page paper describing his goal of someday owning a horse ranch. He wrote about his dream in great detail, and he even drew a diagram of a 200-acre ranch showing the location of all the buildings, the stables, and the track. Then he drew a detailed floor plan for a 4,000-square-foot house that would sit on a 200-acre dream ranch. He put a great deal of his heart into the project, and the next day he handed it in to his teacher. 2 days later, he received his paper back. On the front page was a large red F with a note that read, "See me after class." The boy with the dream went to see the teacher after class and asked, "Why did I receive an F?" The teacher said, "This is an unrealistic dream for a young boy like you. You have no money. You come from an itinerant family. You have no resources. Owning a horse ranch requires a lot of money. You have to buy the land. You have to pay for the original breeding stock. And later, you'll have to pay large stud fees. There's no way you could ever do it." Then the teacher added, "If you will rewrite this paper with a more realistic goal, I will reconsider your grade." The boy went home and thought about it long and hard. He asked his father what he should do. "Look, son, you have to make up your own mind on this. However, I think it is a very important decision for you." Finally, after sitting with it for a week, the boy turned in the same paper, making no changes at all. He stated, "You can keep the F, and I'll keep my dream." Monty then turned to the assembled group and said, "I tell you the story because you are sitting in my 4,000-square-foot house in the middle of my 200-acre horse ranch." I still have that school paper framed over the fireplace. He added, The best part of the story is that 2 summers ago, that same school teacher brought 30 kids to camp out on my ranch for a week. When the teacher was leaving, he said, "Look, Monty, I can tell you this now. When I was your teacher, I was something of a dream stealer. During those years, I stole a lot of kids' dreams. Fortunately, you had enough gumption not to give up on yours. Don't let anyone steal your dreams. Follow your heart, no matter what." Do you remember Barbie's first pet? Hazard to take a guess? Of course, it was a horse, named Dancer. Martin Buxbaum in Table Talk, with an amusing anecdote, wrote, and I quote, "A chicken-hearted knight had to go on a long journey, so he tried to anticipate all problems. He carried a sword and armor in case he met someone unfriendly, a large jar of ointment for sunburn and poison ivy, an axe for chopping wood, a tent, blankets, pots and pans, and oats for his horse. He rode off clanking, gurgling, thudding, and tinkling. He was a moving junk pile." When he was halfway across a dilapidated bridge, the boards gave way, and he and his horse fell into the river and drowned. He had forgotten to pack a life preserver. The moral of the story is that when we overburden ourselves with the anticipation of trouble, fate is laughing her head off. She can provide us with troubles we could never foresee in our wildest dreams. I believe that he who travels with faith travels lightest and safest. You know, horses can teach us many things about gratitude and ourselves. Dave Barry once wrote, "Horses are the opposite of dogs when it comes to gratitude. You give a dog something totally wretched to eat, such as a wad of pre-chewed gum, and the dog will henceforth view you as the supreme being. It will gaze on you for hours with rapt attention and lick the ground you walk on, and try to kill the pizza delivery man if he comes anywhere near you. Whereas, if you spend hours grooming a horse and lugging its food and water around, the horse will be thinking, 'Should I chomp on this person's arm?'" Sidney J. Harris from Field Newspaper Syndicate wrote, "The paradox of friendship is that it is both the strongest thing in the world and the most fragile. Wild horses cannot separate friends, but whining words can. A man will lay down his life for his friend, but will not sacrifice his eardrums." And finally, this bit of sage advice from a Mrs. Patrick Campbell, quoted in Brandreth's bedroom book. "It doesn't matter what you do in the bedroom, as long as you don't do it in the street and frighten the horses." Good night, sweet dreams. I'm Don Jackson.